Hey everybody, it's Dyer, and tonight we are doing the history of Strider, and I've got some special guests with me tonight, co-hosts as it were, and you can see them here. You should see I have Scion 238, Sotenga, and Snarboo with me. Alright guys, go ahead and Sam, why don't you go ahead and start by introducing yourself?
Hey everybody, I'm Sam. I started the Strider fansite Light Sword Cypher Mainframe back in February of 2002. And Rob and I have been on many a wild Strider-ish adventure in the meantime, so I'm very honored to be here tonight with you guys.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, Sam. And right, and then we have Sotenga, otherwise known as Mike.
Hello there, I'm Sotenga. I'm a longtime fan of most things Capcom, and that includes Strider. In fact, for the site HG101, I think I wrote pretty much every Strider article that was worth writing. I don't think I wrote about Journey into Darkness, but I think you could forgive me for that. I hope so, anyway.
You're forgiven, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, and Snarboo, Tom, how about introducing yourself?
I'd hold it against you if you had written about it.
As Dyer noted, I am Tom. I have been a pretty big Strider fan ever since I found it in the arcade as a wee little one. It's one of the first arcade games I can remember seeing. I put quite a bit of time into it. That was one of the first games I owned for the Genesis. Most of my experience with the franchise, though, comes with I hate to say it, but Strider 2 on the Sega Genesis, a lot of the clones, and the 2014 game, which was pretty good. Well, the first one, obviously, I just mentioned that, but yes, I've had quite a I don't know how to put it, but yes, I have some experience with this game.
And well, everyone knows who I am. Yeah, I'm the guy that runs.
No, I'm just kidding.
Never heard of you before.
I'm some guy, and I just kind of hang out here for kicks. And I first heard about this Strider game about an hour ago, and I figured why not learn about it some more.
Well, this ought to be fun then.
Yeah. So, what is Strider? Is he some kind of a stick of candy or an insect?
I thought it was some kind of a robot from Half-Life.
Yeah.
honestly.
Or wasn't it the guy in
Uh,
Lord of the Rings?
yeah, I was gonna say, I thought he was created by J.R.R. Tolkien and inexplicably made into a Native American by Ralph Bakshi. I figure you'd appreciate that nod, Rob.
Oh,
That's a deep
definitely.
cut.
All right. So now,
And hey, Scroll Boss, thank you for forgiving me. You can direct all your complaints to Snarboo for playing that game.
yeah, that game. But we'll get to that one later. All right. Now, as some of you may know, several years back, Sam and I actually conducted, as far as we know, was the first English language interview with the creator of Strider.
That is correct. Yeah, that we were the first ones to interview him. Well, since he had like left Capcom, basically.
Yeah, and he did have a lot of interesting things to say about the game. And
Absolutely. Yeah, that was an eye opener.
yeah, especially some of the stuff that I didn't even think that he would just, he'd be like, I don't really remember. It was so long ago. Yet he remembered. And for any,
Yeah, I mean he was very forthcoming, and I was expecting him to be a lot more. Um, uh, I don't know if hesitant is the right word, but like sometimes uh, there's a difference in the way that Japanese uh, employees talk about things when they still work for the same employer, and they won't be as open about things. But since he was freelance, he opened up a lot about the creation of things, and apparently it was something that had stuck with him for a while because he still had one of the oil paintings that he had done for a poster back in during the tour when they were putting it in the arcades. So it was a very cool time.
oh yeah. Before we go any further, since Scrollboss is here in the chat, I want to point out up there under where it has our names, all the different sprites next to our names were created by Scrollboss. All custom work.
Mm-hmm.
And they are awesome, like all of his work. We are
Mm-hmm.
super happy to be able to use those.
That definitely, yes. So many thanks, Scrollboss, for letting us use those. And I see Geeks with Cash is in the chat. How you doing, Geeks? So
Okay, a quick question. Are we supposed to be able to see the stream chat on the stream? I'm actually watching it and I'm not seeing any of the stream comments on there.
you're right. Hang on a second.
But
I
yeah,
can see it.
thank you, Scroll Boss. Those are some great sprites, and I appreciate being Master Mayo.
Yeah, that's I made that decision. It was like, I think since Sam here, he's the Strider guru, so to speak. So he's here too. And I'm a big
Well,
solo
thank you.
fanboy, so I had to be solo. And Mike, Strabaya there always reminded me of Ivan Drago from Rocky 4. I know how much of a Rocky fan he is.
Yeah, that's very likely intentional, especially with the red pants. So,
Exactly. But and yes, Tom, you were left, and it's like, what better character to give to Tom than Mayo himself? Grandmaster Mayo, which sounds like a bad brand of mayonnaise, if I can dredge that up.
It sure does.
Oh man,
Yeah.
that joke goes back a long time.
Yes, it does. Now, one thing, this interview with Isuke that we've been talking about here, for anyone who's interested in checking that out, that link will be posted here when the video is ended. So you'll be able to go take a look at it. Speaking of that interview, Sam, when he was
Yes.
talking about the creation of Strider, what in particular stuck out to you?
I mean, the thing about that interview is that it wasn't just that interview, because there was a situation where I had to verify that this person on Twitter was actually Isuke before I just jumped in the deep end and started interviewing them. And so the only person that I knew that had any contact with this person was Darren over at what was that class? Retro Gamer. And so I emailed him and I'm like, hey, do you know this guy? Is this guy legit? And turns out he hadn't had any kind of contact with Isuke directly. He had contact through Isuke's boss over at Mitchell Corp back in the day, Roy Ozaki. And so he had no contact, but he also had this dream to get an interview with Koichi Yatsui at the same time. And so I introduced him to Isuke, and I also introduced another journalist who worked for Otaku USA, and her name escapes me for the moment, but I'm looking it up right here in my email. And she got to do an interview as well. So there were like 3 different interviews that came out at the same time with Isuke, and some of the stuff that came out, like nobody had all the same stories. So when you ask me what story sticks out the most, it's not actually one that's in my interview, it's one that's in Darren's, and it talks about Isuke getting stuck outside of his hotel room and having to climb up the fire escape on the outside of this high-rise in the hotel where they were staying, and they were all brainstorming. And he had to do that, otherwise he was going to basically freeze to death and die or drop to his death. And so that's what I think about, and because that basically inspired all of the climbing sequences in Strider. And those are the things that we all remember the most.
Oh yeah, you know,
I found the journalist's name. Her name is Heidi Kemps. Heidi Kemps. She goes by Zero Chan.
that's right. I remember you mentioning her before, and
Yeah.
I don't think I ever actually read her interview.
I have not actually gotten a chance to get a hold of it myself. It got published in Otaku USA, and I could never get a hold of the issue. And I've written into them several times, and she doesn't have a copy anymore, even. So but she went over there. She actually met him because she travels over to Japan all the time. So because of that introduction, she was able to go over there and do a face-to-face interview with him.
Now, that I remember you mentioning, and that was really awesome. In fact, if I remember correctly, because of that interview, you actually been officially made a Strider by Strider's creator.
I mean, yeah, I asked, when she went over there, she asked if I had anything that I wanted to ask him that wasn't in my interview, and I was like, just, if you could, just get his autograph for me. So he got me his autograph, and on that, he called me Strider Sam. And he wrote it in kanji.
I remember seeing that, and that was just one of the coolest things I've ever seen, I think. Now, regarding what else he said in the interview, there were a few things that stood out to me, as far as just the interview we did.
Oh, okay.
Well, I know the one that still blows my mind is the fact that I wanted to ask why the rascals, the little robots in the game, were wearing fur hats. And if I remember correctly, you were kind of like,
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
yeah, he wouldn't remember that. And it's like, ask him anyway. Maybe he will. And if I remember correctly, his response was, I like fur hats.
Yes, that was exactly his response. We asked why they were wearing raccoon skin hats, and he just literally said, I like fur hats.
And
He also mentioned something about them wanting to make the robots wear clothes. Like, why are robots and aliens always naked? Was what he was wondering.
Yeah,
So
something about a silver robot wearing a suit from someplace.
yeah, Savile Row is what he said.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, that was definitely an experience. It's just finding out. It's like, wow, he actually remembers that, and it's all because he likes fur hats. I was kind of surprised though to find out he
I
wasn't.
mean, it was really fun.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I was kind of surprised to find out he had no involvement with any of the other games in the series, though. Not even the ports of the original.
Yeah, that was surprising. Um, I was hoping to get a little more information about a couple of the ports, but he he was only involved in the arcade game. Um,
I'm surprised he's not involved. I'm not surprised he's not involved in the tier text junk.
Yeah, that stuff.
that's a story in and of itself, but that's for a little bit later.
Yeah, let's hold off on that one for a bit. Tom, you ever get a chance to read that interview yourself?
I, I think I did a long time ago, but I don't quite remember what was said. I'll actually need to sit down and read it. Um, I know you had another interview, but we'll get to that one in a moment.
Yep.
But yeah, it's been a while since I've read it, so I can't recall a lot about the details, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'll definitely make sure you get the link for that. Also,
Oh, I have it, yeah.
and Scroll Boss just mentioned too that it was also great to get confirmation on the Tong Poo name inspiration.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
if
a
you
reference
hadn't
to
actually bought that, go ahead.
that's a reference to YMO, right?
It absolutely is. Yellow
Oh
Magic
my.
Orchestra.
Oh why?
We, he, uh, he, he confirmed that in the interview, and actually that was Scrollboss's question. Because when we were uh, looking like we were about to do this, we took a poll basically of the forum that we were on the third moon and asked people what they would like to ask Isuke if they could, or what they would wonder about what they always wondered about the Strider series in general. I forget exactly how you phrased it, Rob, because I don't think we let on that we were actually interviewing Isuke. But we lifted Scrollboss's question wholesale from that thread. And we're like, that is a fantastic question.
Yeah, I remember
So,
that.
um,
That and that he also answered the question which had perplexed people for ages, which was, "What's up with the whale?" At the ending.
uh,
Well, let's be fair. There's a lot of
yeah,
inexplicable elements. Giant mecha gorilla, giant mecha dino, anachronistic pirate captain who goes down like a bitch. Strider is a fantastic cobbling together of many disparate elements, and that's part of why I love it. Really, the whale's just gravy in the end.
In fact, didn't he say something along the lines of that it's like the ending of a western, like where the hero rides off on his horse?
Yeah, that's fair.
yes, yes, that he did.
It's just in this case, the horse is a big whale.
Yep, I got nothing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, well, hey, that works. Why not? Now, something else too, which also surprised me, was finding out that Strider didn't actually do well in arcades in Japan.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, that was really, really surprising on my end of things. Of course, it's only been in recent years that we've actually started getting sales data made public. And even now, we don't get like digital storefront sales data. They don't even give the publishers that half the time. But it was surprising that the coin op, the 1989 coin op, was such a flop in Japan that it meant that he had to go and leave for another company that was being started, with the guy that started Mega Man and the guy that did Ghosts and Goblins. That was Takeru.
Oh, yeah, that's right. But it's like, I guess it's like Contra in that sense, where it was a lot more popular overseas than it was in Japan.
That's the
I
case with
mean,
a number of Japanese franchises. There was another one. The name escapes me, but yes, that seems to be a phenomenon every so often. Wait, Metroid, that was the one, I believe, that was more popular in the States, at least for a time. Or
Yeah,
wait, yeah.
yeah, I seem to remember reading something about that way back when. Let's see. Oh, BL85 Gamers here. Nice of you to show up.
Ew.
Oh, but the arcade game got ported to so much though. I mean, you had the Genesis Mega Drive port, which was lauded back in the day. There was the
I mean, it was about as close as you could get outside of Japan, with the home consoles that were available. It was, I mean, it had the same processor as the CPS-1 board, and it could do most of the things that the CPS-1 board could. They just had to rearrange the chip tunes and redraw some of the sprites, or actually, they had to redraw all the graphics to make them 16-bit. And in the process, they actually made some sections easier, like on the third moon. You can't go through the drill spike section by hanging in the coin op. You can't. Those drills will nail you every time. But you can do it on the Genesis version, and that makes it a little bit easier for people at home. And I mean, it was an instant classic, the Mega Drive Genesis version.
yeah, it was. I mean, that's how I actually first played the game. Back then, a friend of mine
Me
had
too.
he borrowed it and left it at my house, so I just spent a weekend with it.
I'd just like to ask a point blank, blunt question here. What makes Strider so good, in your opinions?
Giant robot apes and Centipede Parliament.
Good reasons.
Communist centipedes.
It's hard to argue with that, really.
Yeah. What about you, Sam?
I mean, there's something that is undeniably cool about a character who is as acrobatic as Hiryu is. And I have always had a fascination with swords and sword play. Um, it's just one of those rare games that is such an excellent blend of different tropes and stock character types, and also just a really unique uh, worldview and setting. Um, honestly, but I think the reason that it is so enduring is that it made cinematic games look possible. Um, and it did it in gameplay, as Scrollboss is very fond of pointing out. He is absolutely correct. Um, they did things in the gameplay that other people would struggle to do for decades afterwards and would cheat to pull off with quick time events. Uh, that big run sequence is something that is just one of the most thrilling things in all of that generation's arcade games. You just can't imagine in this day and time what kind of an impact that had on the gamers of that generation to be outrunning all those things as they're exploding behind you, and then make that jump over nothingness, like with zero indication of what's coming for you. It was just an experience, the same way that watching Star Wars was an experience. There was nothing like it before that.
That's a good way of putting it. I would say it was the 16-bit. It ushered in the 16-bit before we even knew what the 16-bit really was. Well, that console generation, yes.
Yeah. I gotta say, Big Run's always the first thing that comes to my mind whenever I think of moments like that.
Yeah. Overall,
And I mean, on top of that, you could go for it.
I just want to say I just like how madcap and chaotic the game is. Barely any time at all is wasted. You're just like sluicing through from one set piece to the next. Rarely ever does it drag. It's just, like picturesque scene after picturesque scene, and it's never a boring game, and that's why I think is its primary appeal. It is just breakneck in its pace. Maybe a little too fast at times. Maybe I just suck, so I don't know.
Well, I'm gonna.
I mean, I'll be honest. I've never even got a star rank on Strider 2, so I'm not going to tout my gaming skills. I'm still struggling to complete the 2014 game on hard, so I can get all the trophies. So, no one needs to be flexing here on my account. But you're absolutely right, Mike. Yeah, it's exactly that. And adding to that, the musical pieces are so atmospheric and so well aligned with the stages. It really felt like someone had sat John Williams down to score a video game.
It is a cinematic movie score, straight up and absolutely.
This is true.
Yeah, the game would not be the same without some of those set piece tunes to go with, the actual set pieces in the game. Notably, the airship Balrog that has some of my favorite tunes in any game I've ever played, especially the low G section. It's so good.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna say as far as what made Strider appeal to me is pretty much all the above and Solo. I just really like Solo.
Yes, that is a great design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure how prominent rival characters were back in the late 80s, but he certainly stands out as a sterling example, like, Dire 51 in the Aleste series, or, I know there are other examples, I'm just blanking.
It's kind of more of a shmup trope, because you always have that one black jet that always wants to just do you in.
Exactly, yes, that's what Solo is before all that.
But then you have Solo, who's like RoboCop meets, trying to think, RoboCop with the jetpack, but it's not the really bad RoboCop 3.
RoboCop meets Boba Fett.
I would love to discuss the RoboCop series another time, but that's not for
Yes,
now.
that's out of the.
Very true. But yeah, going with some of the other home ports, like the ones that didn't make it over here, the PC Engine port, which actually, if you look at the video, is what's currently playing.
Mm-hmm.
It's.
Oh, that is a story.
I'm gonna say that the final product was okay, and that extra stage they threw in was it just kind of lacks some of the stuff the original.
It feels
stages
European, and I mean that derogatorily.
It's very flat from what I remember. It's kind of just, there's not a lot of that dynamism or sort of sloped terrain that seems to typify, Strider and its, sequels and clones.
Yeah, and let's take it this way. Communist Centipede, Martial Arts Slady Trio, gigantic gravity core that flings it everywhere. The best I could come up with was a frickin' tank. That's kind of lame.
Well, hey, the Tier Tech Strider 2 also came up with that idea, so I guess great minds think alike. I don't know.
Yep.
Jeebus.
Yeah, I'll say something about that Tier Tech's tank later. All right, but I think you.
I mean, the PC Engine port. A lot of people got hung up on that one because it it had bounced through so many NEC formats, and it had started off as a Super Graphics version, and if you look at the source code, you can see all of the formats that it's gone through just by looking at the way that things are done in the ROM itself. But I personally, I don't think that Toshio Tabata was trying to make it graphically identical to the coin-op. I think honestly, he was trying to make the music at least halfway decent and couldn't do it before the CD format came out. Because the sound chips, if you listen to the actual sound that's playing through the sound chips versus the stuff that's in Red Book format on the CD, there's a vast gap in quality. The stuff that's going through the sound chips is just terrible. And I think that the audio chips on the NEC consoles were just not capable of producing what the composer of the coin-op had actually pulled off. Junko Tamiya, that's what her name was. Junko Tamiya.
Yeah,
Very prominent composer in Capcom's days. I believe she did Bionic Commando NES's soundtrack too.
she did.
Yes.
And that was definitely, it's just, I don't know, it's just not quite as good. It looks 8-bit in the end almost. Like a, weird
Well, yeah.
middle ground between an 8-bit console and a 16-bit console.
That's basically what Super Graphics was.
Having
It
played
was never going to be better than the arcade. Never.
better than the arcade, no, definitely not. But it could have come close. All you got to do is look at Capcom's ports of 1941 and Ghouls and Ghosts to see that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, but they weren't doing the same stuff that Strider was. Like, they had the scrolling layers and all the RAM requirements. If you look at like the hardware requirements for Ghouls and Ghosts, probably comes the closest to what the demands on the hardware that it makes. But I don't think, unless you had something that was close to the hardware spec, I don't think you were going to get anything close to gameplay like you got in the coin-op.
yeah, it's a shame we'll never find out, though. But yeah, moving on to another port that never left Japan, the X68000 port.
How was that one?
Oh my lord.
That is practically it. It is so close to arcade perfect, you swear you're actually playing the arcade game.
Nice.
That's because it's got the same motherboard and chip. I mean, and the X68K, first of all, and like I was saying to you earlier today, that sucker needed to have made it to other shores besides the Japanese market.
Oh, did it ever?
That was like 10 years ahead of its time as a computer. It worked with any TV as a monitor, and it looked like it was straight out of the future as well. And all of its games that were ported to it were just stand out.
Yeah,
And the only limitation that they really had was the fact that they were all on floppies.
yeah, pretty much. It does make it strange to try and load some games, Strider being one of them. You have to actually put a disc in first that's kind of an intro disc with the Capcom logo on it. Then you have to swap that out for disc 1 and also put disc 2 in the other drive, and then you can run it like normal. I don't think I've ever seen any other games that do it like that. But, aside from being great and having never left Japan, there's not really much else to say about it. So, that's going to bring us to what could be Tom's area of expertise here.
Yes, the various PC ports. I poured a lot of time and research into it, notably, mostly just watching gameplay footage because when you get down to it, um, most of the ports are really bad in different ways. With one exception, I'll get to that in a bit, but the Amiga and Atari ST ports are probably the most disappointing because, especially in the case of the Amiga, it runs a 68K chip. And I believe the ports came
Mm.
out about 1999 or so. And you think about the other games that would have been released for the system around that time. I mean, you had Shadow of the Beast. There's no reason a more competent Strider port couldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been maybe as good as the Genesis port, but it could have at least matched the TurboGrafx or PC Engine port. But
Yeah.
instead, we got this really cut down. I hesitate. I wouldn't call it an abomination. It's just not good. There's no hardly any music in it. There's not a lot of sound. A lot of the game has been cut up and kind of arranged weirdly. All the ports have physics glitches of different kind, and that one and the Atari ST and Amiga ports are no exception. And secondly, all of the PC ports and some of the console ports, they don't have an ending. Especially in the case of the Atari ST and Amiga ports, you just get up to the second Mechapon fight, you destroy it, and then you get what I can only describe as an Evangelion ending, as in the original, where it's like, "Congratulations, Strider, you have beaten the simulation." And when I saw that, I'm like, "Really? This is the ending you went with? You couldn't have like the master maybe just appear? You fight him a little bit." I understand if you couldn't do the centipede ride, or whatever, but that was just pathetic. As you actually go down, though, system strength and system quality, the game's actually improved compared to the hardware. Like the ZX Spectrum port's probably the best of the PC ports. Um, just because. Oh, we have another special guest here. It's my cat, but anyway. Um, yeah, she just booped me. But anyway, that one, for what that hardware is, it's basically running almost the same hardware, I think, as the original Game Boy. It's a Z80 chip, I believe. And it's actually pretty impressive. There's physics glitches, and, the game's still cut down, but it's at least understandable given the limitations of the hardware. The Commodore 64 version is much the same way. Um, the I didn't actually get to see anything. It's really hard doing research for this system, but I don't know anything about the Amstrad CPC port. It looks gorgeous because that system had really good graphics quality for the time it came out, and I think it has something like 16-bit color. I think it can only display so many colors to screen, but it has a very rich color palette. Um, so I have no clue. It's probably on par with the ZX port. If I had to guess, it just looks nicer. And then there's the outlier, which is the DOS port, which supports like every graphic mode available at the time. Like you had VGA 16 color using a custom palette. You had EGA and CGA, which I would not recommend ever playing a DOS game in CGA unless it specifically built for it. But that one is really weird. It seems to be kind of a mishmash of all of the ports. Like some of the bits are like the ZX port, some of it are like the Amiga port. But it's probably the worst out of all of them, just because. Yeah, I guess it's good for what you could do on an IBM PC at the time, but it's only barely a step above. I believe it was US Gold that ported him a Mega Man to DOS, and that's a pretty infamous port there. Um, there's not really much else to say. I mean, they're all various, just different levels of kind of bad or cut down. I will give shout outs though to Strider to having almost as many ports as the original Shadow of the Beast and Lemmings. Those are two games that got ported to almost everything. Um, Although I don't think Strider got an FM Towns port, unlike I believe both Lemmings and Shadow of the Beast, oddly enough. But yes, probably the less said about those ports, the better. I meant if that's all you had, it's still a good Strider fix, but it's not anything anybody's probably likely to revisit in the modern era.
Yeah. Uh, I will say I did play the Commodore 64 version back in the day. It was there. That's a really nice thing.
Yes, that's about how I would describe the quality of that port. It's at least okay given the hardware.
Yeah. Of course, you know who was responsible for most of these ports.
Yes, tier text.
Yep, and they also ended up porting the game to the Sega Master System, which is by far one of the worst Master System games I've ever played. And, I mean, forget just as an arcade port of Strider, just as a game by itself. If I had no idea what Strider was, I'd have picked it up, played it, and been like, why is this dude jumping in slow motion and there's like nothing here? He's tiny, there's so much screen space, and there's nothing going on. And this game is bad. But before we go into a little more about tier text, though, there was another Strider game being developed at the same time as the arcade game. And it's one that's also actually currently showing on the video. That would be the NES game. And
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
that's an interesting story in and of itself as to what happened there. So,
Well,
Hmm.
well, I mean, as far as I know, there was a three-way project. Um, the the Strider collaboration was one with uh, a manga circle in Japan called Modokikaku, and uh, Modokikaku was going to uh, produce the manga version, and then Patariro was going to produce the home version, and Isuke was supposed to produce the commercial coin-op version. And Patariro and what was the guy's name? Tatsumi Wada from Modokikaku were of one mind on the story, but Isuke wanted to do something different, and he wanted to play to the strengths of the hardware and make a game that was going to be the best suited for that hardware. Whereas Patariro and Tatsumi Wada wanted to do something that was more story-based. And they had the luxury of doing that because they were doing something at home where it wasn't supposed to be so action-filled and encourage high turnover and lots of quarters. And so the NES game and the manga have the same story because they actually cooperated together, and Isuke did not cooperate with them. He did his own thing. And it's very telling that we remember what he did as opposed to what the original goal of the project was and what they did. Not that either one is necessarily bad or invalid. They're both kind of the same or different takes on the same material, but that's why we got such a different story and a different game experience out of the Famicom and NES version.
now I always found it interesting that the NES game made it out in the US and the manga never showed up here. And it was exactly the opposite in Japan because the Famicom version was canceled.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was one of the cryptids of the Strider universe was finding the Famicom version because, and that was one of the first things that I was trying to do when I first started getting into Strider. I was like, this game cannot be translated this badly. It cannot be written this badly in Japanese. I want to go find the Japanese version. Didn't exist.
Yep.
I wanted to get a transcript of the game and like compare it side by side and see what the original Japanese was. Couldn't do it.
Yeah. Now, Mike, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to remark the NES Strider is a bizarre little nugget of a game. If I wanted to very bluntly surmise it, it is akin somewhat to Bionic Commando and Bionic Commando NES's structure, but with a little bit of a slightly looser, maybe more Metroid-ish design in its stages, even if just slightly. Uh, it is also kind of held together by duct tape and gum.
I can tell you, it's fun. I'm fond of saying that it was basically a half-finished prototype given a last-minute polish and a half-ass translation job that just got thrown, into the U.S. market. And a lot of people loved it, especially back in the day. I saw some really high review scores back then. Of course,
Yeah, I
It's
mean, I still like the
that
game. It's just it's a little bit hard for a more discerning eye to overlook its flaws. There is one thing I wanted to jump to right away, but our friend E.C. Myers isn't in the chat, so I'll withhold for now.
well, it's I know exactly what you're going to say, and
Yes.
that's I think honestly what most people remember about it these days.
Oh, you mean the freaking wall jump in the Egypt level?
The
The
triangle
only
jump.
Yeah.
time the only time you ever have to do that maneuver, and it is even more nightmarish than how Super Metroid does it.
How did you guys
Yeah.
get past it?
I have no idea. I just kind of did it.
I
What?
mean, the triangle jump was it was designed for something that had more precise collision detection than the 8-bit consoles could actually pull off.
Yeah.
And unless you were going to do it with a wall cling, like what Batman and Super Metroid did, or Ninja Gaiden, then you weren't really going to be able to do that on the NES.
How about you, Tom?
And
Oh, sorry, Sam. If you're not done, go ahead.
no, go for it.
I actually haven't played the NES version very much. That's actually kind of a black hole in my experience, mostly because I didn't. Most of my experience with the NES was, at friends' house. Like this would have been early childhood, so it would have been friends' houses. It would have been babysitters at houses, that kind of thing. Family members, that sort of thing. I didn't own a console until the Sega Genesis, and when I got it, it was Christmas time, and this was Strider was one of the first games I got for it. But I had seen it in the arcade prior. I find it interesting out of a lot of the people here in the chat and in the call or the live cast that I'm the only one that actually saw it in the arcade first. And
Wait! You saw the NES Strider in the arcade?
no, I'm sorry, I was going off on a tangent there. I'm just saying I don't have any experience with the NES version. My experiences actually start with the arcade game.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, I don't. They did not do an NES or a Play Choice 10 Strider. I can't imagine what that would have been like. But they did do
Yeah.
the Goonies or the
Yeah.
Goonies 2, one of those.
Yeah, that would have been the Goonies, but
Yes.
I'll tell you how I got past it. Turbo. It
Turbo
actually,
Fire.
it
Air
actually
Bangers.
makes it so easy.
Fascinating. Because I remember Sotenga actually streamed Strider a few years ago, and he got stuck on that triangle jump for so long.
Oh,
But he
I
did manage
did.
to get past it.
Shoot. This
This was
sounds
a
like
long
something.
time ago, I
It sounds
believe.
like something I would do.
Wait,
To be
which
fair.
wall were you trying to jump off of, though? Were you trying to jump off the right wall or the left wall first?
I think the left one.
Because, like, if you try to jump off the right one, you'll just clip right through it. You can't bounce off that one if you're jumping towards it for some odd reason. I don't know why. But you have to hit that left one first and then bounce back.
Jeez.
The funny thing about using turbo is it almost like you do little micro jumps up the wall.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about the rest of the game that isn't just this one specific spot that gave us all nightmares?
I could think of one.
Shoot.
That'd be that one tube that takes you all the way back to another area, and you have no idea the first time you play it. It's like,
Oh yeah, isn't it like in Africa or Australia and it takes you to a whole nother continent?
yeah,
Uh, God. Also, going through Africa, that whole underground section
oh,
was just so long.
oh yeah,
Um,
that sucks.
but I think the most like the most memorable part for me, like bad memories, is the final boss, or second to last final boss, Matic,
Oh
because
yeah.
everyone swears that you have to like do the charge up plasma thing and jump up and down to get Matic to stop charging at you. I've never been able to make that work. I don't know why. He always gets up to
Really?
me and disarms me. So I have to switch back and forth to my sub menu and hit him with a fireball and then switch back and hope I have enough time for the glitchy activation system to take so that I can actually hit him once. I I don't know what it is about me playing that game or what, but I've never been able to make it work. In fact, when I wrote the FAQ for that for Game Facts, I put that in the FAQ that I wrote for the NES Strider. I said, "You may be able to make this work. I have never made it work."
Well, I hate to sound like that guy, but I haven't actually had any problems with that bit. Maybe you were playing like an anti-piracy copy and that's where it kicked in.
Heck of a time for that to kick in, though, almost at the end of the game.
Yeah, I have heard of anti-piracy thingies doing that.
Yeah,
I was playing it on an NES cartridge on an original NES. We're talking about like 1995. This is
Jiminy.
this is not on emulation. So
I don't know what to tell you, man. That's bogus. That's unfortunate.
yeah, that's
Mm.
I've never heard that one
I,
not working either. Well, maybe not the jumping up and down part, but I usually just zap him with the plasma ball and then follow him and just beat the crap out of him until he gets a cipher back and then do it again.
I do know that it was enough of a struggle that people were writing into Nintendo Power about it. Like, how do
Yeah,
you do that? And that was the advice that they told the guy writing in.
interesting.
So
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, the NES game was, well, it is what it is.
Pretty much.
But let's circle back around to tier text. And yeah, we know they did some iffy ports, but
Very.
that's not the main reason I remember tier text. You know why I remember tier text.
Snarboo, step up to the plate.
Yes.
Lord.
Okay, so get this. One of the first games you get for your Sega Genesis, it's Strider. It's like it's a good time. You love it. It pairs well with your other games, notably Sonic the Hedgehog, Altered Beast, and Super Thunderblade. Two of those games eventually went back to the store. I'll let you guess which ones, but anyway. So Strider, good game. I wanted more. I would try to glitch out into areas of the map that you're not supposed to get into because I literally thought there was more to the game than there really was, especially in that underground section in Siberia where you're climbing up and there's that big spinny thing. It looks like there's like an area you should be able to get into. So I love Strider. Wanted more of it. Was thinking about ways you could make sequels
yeah,
to it and all that, but later on, I forget what year it was. It probably was 93, 94 or so. I was reading an article in a magazine and they were advertising Strider 2. And I was really excited because it's like, wait, more Strider? It's like, when is this coming out? Well, I don't know the exact release date for Strider 2, but I found it for rental in a store and I took it home and, well, was it great? But I was just happy to have more Strider. When you're young, sometimes you just want things to be good that you'll just say, this isn't so bad, but it really is. But it's also a game I have beaten a lot. I have beaten that game at least 4 or 5 times over various different platforms. Emulation, the different emulators, the original Sega Genesis, and so on. And I would not recommend that unless you're a masochist.
Hmm.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to say about the game because it's like it wants to be Strider, but what it does is the Genesis version especially, it controls almost exactly like Strider. They definitely reverse engineered the programming for the Genesis port. But he's been put into a game where his, fast moving, momentum driven gameplay does not work. He is mostly stuck in labyrinths with 90-degree angles, and it just is a bad time because there is so much delay on the jump, there's so much lag in the game proper. It's the designs are hideous and uninspired. The levels are hideous and uninspired.
Yeah.
The second level is probably the worst in the game and also the longest. Oh, those force fields. You can get bounced between them so many times until you just die, basically. That killed me so much.
Yeah.
Also, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
This game here, Strider Returns, Journey from Darkness, as it is known, it is... I hate to sound derogatory against an entire nation, continent, but it's very European, and I mean that as derogatorily as possible.
Yes, it is very Euro, as they say, Eurojank, whatever term you find most appropriate. But when you read about how those games are actually developed, it suddenly makes a lot of sense. But in any case, yes, it's a very Euro take on Strider. It's, and I hate to say this, but the Genesis port is the best. I haven't played any of the other ports, but I've done research into them, and so on and so forth, and they're all various different kinds of weird.
Yeah.
Every other version besides, I believe, the Master System and the Genesis version, Strider Hinjo, as he is known in this game, gets to turn into a tank. He turns into a robotic tank for the boss fights. In the Genesis version, instead you get a shield during boss fights, like a temporary shield that eventually wears off. But yeah, you just see Strider just turn into a mech and start shooting at like tanks and stuff, and it's a very weird time. He also gets a gun too. He gets a proper gun instead of the shurikens for some reason. It's like a rifle, and he just shoots it at things.
Yeah. Now, if I remember correctly, and I'm sure Sam can correct me on this if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I mean,
it was Transforming Overland Robot or something is how it started out, or Tor. Like completely
yes.
unrelated.
So Tiertex got the rights to make all those home ports of Strider, and they had all the graphics left over, right? And what happened was there was a developer that was working on a new game for the Amiga, and he was developing this game called Tor the Overland Robot, and he used Strider graphics as like a stand-in so he could get the coding right? And then, so the gameplay of that you're talking about with like the sword and the gun and transforming into a robot, that was supposed to be actually what Tor was going to become. But then his boss walks through and sees the graphics with Strider in them, and he's like, oh, hey, that's a great idea. We should make a sequel to Strider. He's like, I know people at Capcom. We can do this. And so they did.
Yeah.
Over and against the developer's wishes. They transformed his game into a Strider sequel, and it should have been Tor. And like the Amiga version is the only one with credits on it, because he basically defied the company and put his own name on it. Tiertex didn't want their employees doing that. Alan Finley, when he was developing the Genesis port, he basically had a hardware emulator of the Genesis that allowed him to grab graphics in real time, and so he was upscaling the Amiga version to work on the Genesis. And they literally handed him the Amiga version and said, "Make it like this, but make it look 16-bit." And so that's literally
I did do that.
Yeah. And if
follow the spec.
Yep. Now, if anyone's interested in reading that interview, I'm going to link to that one as well.
that era of development's very interesting in general. So I'm sure it's a gold mine of you know, company politics and programming secrets and whatnot.
Yeah.
It absolutely is, and as someone who was a longtime Strider fan and was just absolutely revolted by Strider returns for so many years, it wasn't until um, I we interviewed Alan Finley for the site, and I was like, they were just trying to do their jobs, and game developers are just like any other creatives. They're not setting out to make bad games. When you see a bad game getting published, something has gone wrong internally at the developer or with the publisher. There's been a conflict. It isn't like they decided, oh, and today is the day that we're going to ruin the Strider franchise or the Splatterhouse franchise or the Castlevania franchise. Nobody sets out to do that. Um, there's some kind of politics involved, always.
Yeah. Before we move on from Strider returns and whatnot, I did say I wanted to mention something about tanks earlier. Apparently, there's some reviewers in Brazil that absolutely loved Strider returns. I mean, lavish
You're talking
praise
to
on it.
Rodrigo.
Hmm?
I said, you've been talking to Rodrigo, haven't you?
Yes. In fact, he was the one he shared a scan of a Brazilian review that it showed a picture of Hinjo in front of this tank, and it says something after that, and he translated basically as saying that Hiryu, because they weren't going to let him Hinjo, has to use all of his charm and seduce the tank. It's like,
What?
Yep.
exactly.
Like,
It's like charm, seduce, tank.
I got nothing. I mean, I think that falls more on the journalist writing the article there.
Is that a
Yeah.
lost in translation thing there? I'm wondering, is it a pun or is it punny in the native language?
Well, they did have quotes around the words charm and seduce. So, but yeah, that was just one of those out of left field things. Like, you got to do what with what? But, it was after that, well, Strider went on hiatus for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden,
Yes,
yeah, good.
I was just going to say a very long time indeed.
Except that one thing did happen that kind of caused Capcom to reevaluate it eventually. Because it was right during those dead years that certain versus fighting game came out. Marvel versus Capcom. And who should show up? Hiryu.
mm-hmm.
That,
The wicked new scarf.
yes. And it was cool.
Or an old scarf, depending on if you remembered the manga.
Also
For
true.
the NES game.
And, he had all of his different options and stuff from the arcade game. He'd use his special attacks, and he was just such a cool character to play with. I mean, I'm not even a fan of fighting games, but it was great playing as him in that. And
I couldn't mesh with this play style, unfortunately, in that game.
yeah,
He's definitely a high skill game. I think he has like the most moves out of any character, but he's usually considered pretty high tier, which is impressive for the Capcom side because it's usually the Marvels who have the better options in most of those games. But I'm a fighting game nerd, so I'll shut up.
now he did come back for Marvel vs. Capcom 2, if I recall correctly.
He did,
Yep.
yes. And 3.
Yep.
Didn't that one actually end up being like Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 Infinite or something like that?
Yeah,
he
there
did.
was originally Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and then there was Ultimate, which added several more characters, and I think Kiryu was actually one of the Ultimate editions. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was added in later, yeah.
I know that
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Cool.
well, apparently his popularity in the game caused Capcom to rethink something, and then all of a sudden in 1999 arcades and 2000 on the PlayStation, we get the real Strider 2.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
Yeah, and the developers on that game basically were kind of shoved to the side. Nobody really got any support from Capcom Japan. Um, they had to bring in someone higher up to kind of crack down and get the game out the door. Um, it was the same kind of story all over again with that we heard with the Super Graphics version. People started um, having close to mental breakdowns trying to get the game together and not having the resources. But they did a pretty good media push at Tokyo Game Show, and they had a bunch of people dressed up as Hiryu and Tong Pu um, to promote the game. And it, I mean, it was kind of middling. It wasn't. It was better than Strider Returns, but it wasn't as cohesive of a game. Partly
Yeah.
because the era of games that it was, where we were all used to seeing load screens, and the load screens broke up everything, and so there wasn't as much of a flow between levels as there was between the coin op from back in 1989 and this game.
yeah.
Um, it just uh, it was kind of sad because the people that were involved, uh, I've reached out to them since and tried to get them to talk about it, and they don't want to. Um, it was a bad experience. Um, they've the guy that put it out actually has apologized publicly for not doing a better game because that's how bad he feels about it.
Mm.
And
And
it's actually okay too. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, okay, certainly, but I'm gonna jump into Sam's corner here and admit I was pretty awed by this game when I first played it, but over the years I've come to think that something feels a little off about this one somehow. It feels a lot more quarter munchy than the original did.
Yes, it's not as well balanced. I agree with Sam when he says that the momentum is broken by the load screens. That is
Yeah.
actually my biggest and really possibly only complaint with the game. Given the sort of limitations of doing that 2D and 3D style, I can understand the level design being what it is, and some other qualities of the game being what they are. But the load screens really kill the experience, and I don't know what I mean. I imagine that's just because of the development hell the game went in is what led to that. But I would love to see a version that just removes those entirely. I think the game would be a lot better for it if that were to happen. But it is what it is.
Agreed. I just know I remember seeing pictures of that in a magazine, maybe a year or so before it came out, and just saying Strider 2. They're gonna do Strider 2, like an actual Strider 2. I got to get this. And then it kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back.
yes, yes, like at one point it almost got canceled. Like the home version almost got canceled entirely, and then inexplicably it showed up and on and it's still kind of an outlier for Capcom in that era because it's it uses all new sprites when Capcom had really been in the business of reusing sprites from game to game. I mean, it's completely fresh and new in terms of like a platformer, which Capcom had kind of gotten out of the business of doing. Um, and it just there's not any magic to it. Is really the problem when it comes down to it. There's not that same kind of thrill that you get from playing the '89 coin op. And I don't know what lightning in a bottle they captured on that first one, but it's lacking in this one. But I mean, I've played many games that are much worse. I'm sure
Yeah.
you guys have too.
I got
It's still eminently playable, to be sure, and it's got a lot of boss fights, and some still pretty neat set pieces. I think Dyer will agree that the fight on the escape ship with a talented swordsman by the name of Admiral Wilhelm is a highlight.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
definitely. And that's at the time, considering that most of it was, most of the games for the PlayStation were like, early 3D games. This was just such a nice welcome change. Like I hadn't been that excited about a game since Symphony of the Night came out.
Yes. It, I Scrollbross actually brought this up, and I was going to mention it. It's one of those very lovely 2.5D games of the era, and sometimes they would where they'd mix the 2D and the 3D elements, and it has this good sense of depth to it. Like the backgrounds, they actually do look. They look really nice in Strider 2. That's something that really stands out, and I was noticing that when the footage was playing here on the stream. Um, and you don't get 2.5D games quite like that anymore that have that sort of, I don't know how to explain it. Janaza Qua, I believe, is the term, but it's a good looking game, even if it's not always a good playing game.
Yeah. But then it came and went. I don't know how well it sold or anything like that. It was nice to have they had the original Strider package in on a separate disc.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for at least a couple people that was an extra incentive to pick it up.
That was for me.
But, after that happened, then again we had nothing for years.
Decades, even.
Well, at least about 15 years, 14 years,
Yes.
nothing else. Because then we finally got the 2014 Strider. And Sam, I know you've actually talked pretty extensively with Tony Barnes, who was, well, did he help the game, or how'd that go?
I'm sorry. Repeat that question. You kind of cut out on my end.
I know you've talked pretty extensively with Tony Barnes, and I guess he was what the lead on the project, or what was his role exactly?
Well, he was working with Double Helix. He was basically the point person with Double Helix, who was the developer on the game, and Capcom had basically contracted with Double Helix to do Strider, and so you had like this very old school, tight development team feel. On top of which, Tony is a lifelong Strider fan, and it had been his dream to make a Strider-like game. That was like on his bucket list. And so to be able to make a Strider sequel was something that he knew was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So he wanted to put everything into it that he could possibly think of, that he thought was cool, or that he'd ever thought would be something that would be cool in a Strider game. And I feel like they pulled it off. I feel like they did a really fantastic job. They did a great job updating the characters. They made it into they sort of distilled all of the different versions of Strider into one storyline, and also added new things to make something of a narrative where you had to really read into things before. And I was actually very, very, very impressed with what they had done, with only minor nitpicks to really say I would have cared to go a different way. Gameplay, design, even like in that era of PlayStation downloadables and Xbox Live downloadables, I hadn't really seen a 3D platformer or 2.5D platformer that was rendered in 3D that had the snap and the responsiveness that this game really did. The closest that had gotten to it was Isuke's own Moondiver, and I have to say, Double Helix's work on Strider 2014, I said at the time, and I say it now, it's better than the responsiveness and the maneuverability on Moondiver. The gameplay is just better all around, and that's because of their custom hex engine that they had built that nobody else had access to. They knew what they were doing, and they made the most of everything and their resources, and it was everything that I had hoped for since starting the Light Sword Cypher Mainframe.
Didn't Isuke himself actually give his thumbs up for the game?
Andrew Szymanski, who was a Capcom producer producing the game, he interviewed Isuke, and that was included on the retail version and as a bonus on the disc. And Isuke also posted on Twitter that he wishes them, or he said something like he was praying for them or wishing them all the luck, because making a Strider game is it can put you on the canvas. It's like making a Superman film.
So you're saying it's a little bit of a cursed medium in a sense.
I don't know if cursed is the right word. More like there's a lot of balls to juggle to make
Yes. Yeah.
it really work. You've got so much going on at once, and it all has to work or none of it works, because you've got to have precise gameplay and controls. You've got to have really vivid setting and graphics. You've got to have atmospheric music, all that stuff we were talking about with the coin-op that the coin-op did so well. It's hard to get all those things to that level and all working together, and it's a task. But I was really impressed with Michael John Malo's soundtrack for the 2014 game and how he remixed and brought back deep cuts from other soundtracks, like the NES Underground theme, and even like the new pieces of music that you hear over the title screen. They just fit with the world. The most heartbreaking thing for me about that game, honestly, was that right before it released, Amazon bought Double Helix. Because at that point I was like, okay, well, we're not getting a sequel. Because if they bought Double Helix, we're not. I mean, it's made on the Hex engine, and Amazon now owns the Hex engine, and we're done. It's one and done.
Yep, and that sadly ended up being how it was.
I, for one, am at least glad that we did get this game, and I gotta agree with pretty much everything Sam said. It's a very, very solid action-adventure game. I don't know how anyone feels about the word Metroidvania. Some I know just hate its guts, but if talking about that genre, I think this is actually a very solid, if not underrated entry in that genre. And in 2014, before that genre like just really exploded and flew off, it's pretty much everything I could have hoped for in a modern Strider. I do have one poo-poo against it, but mentioning that would be kind of a spoiler in the late game, so I'm not sure if I should.
Well, that's your call here, I think.
I'll just say, do everything you can, as soon as you can. I'll just leave it at that. But otherwise, good game, very good game. Very cool bosses too. Plucked from several really neat original bosses, but most of them are plucked from all over the series mythology, and I think they work pretty well in the context.
I even feel like they lifted a little bit from Strider Returns. There's at least a tank boss in the game, which I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And you get the shurikens. Right. You get the shurikens from Strider Returns, but
yeah.
Everybody else has just hit the nail on the head. The only thing I can really add to this is there's only one omission from the game that I felt that I really felt, and that was the fact that Lago, the mechanical T-Rex, does not come back. I know that's a bit of a spoiler, but he did not return from what I remember. But there's a bunch of returning faces if you care about that sort of thing. Also, shout outs to the cinematics in that game. Like they made Solo, who was already a huge badass, that much more badass in
And
Yeah, they did.
insane too.
yes, in the 2014
Incredibly.
reboot.
But yeah, that's so. If that was the final Strider game we're gonna get, and who knows, then at least it went out on a high note.
Oh yes, absolutely.
But now Isuke had been busy because he never quite could leave the concept of Strider behind, and well, look what he gave us. We got the Cannon Dancer, aka Osmond arcade game, which I'm sure the news is finally starting to spread about it, but it's actually going to be released next year for the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4.
Yes, that was very fortuitous timing, and it's very nice to actually have that in a home port now because I believe the arcade, like emulation such as it is, it's not perfectly emulated. I seem to remember there was a little bit of jank there.
It took them a while to get it working in MAME, and they fixed something deep down, and then they discovered that it helped fix Osmond. So I don't know that I don't keep close tabs on the MAME community. In fact, the only reason I was keeping tabs on them at all was because I was wanting to play Cannon Dancer.
Yeah.
And once it was working, I was like, okay, well, I'm good. But that was my understanding. And there was something to do with the hardware that was difficult and tricky to emulate. But I'm looking forward to see how faithful the home port is, because I want an Isuke collection at some point, and this was kind of the holdout. All the others have home ports. All of other Isuke's other games have home ports, but Cannon Dancer had never been ported to anything. So
apparently, this one's being worked on by INIS Games, who did the Pocky and Rocky remaster that came out earlier this year.
nice.
So I think it's in good hands, based on everything I've heard about.
I just want to ask one thing.
Uh-huh.
Why is
Okay.
your boss wearing nothing but his swim trunks at the beginning of the game?
Jack.
That whole bit, yes, the story to the game, such as it is,
Let's
it is
be
quite
honest.
a ride.
There is nothing about this game that makes any damn sense. Really, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
He's Strobia's long-lost brother. That's
Okay.
all I can say.
Well, Isuke did consider Osmond to be his irregular sequel to Strider.
Irregular?
His words.
That's a very mild word.
Are you saying Osmond hasn't taken his fiber?
No.
Not quite. But there was that, and then I know Sam mentioned it once already, but years and years later, he ended up doing the game Moondiver, which is like multiplayer Strider.
Yes.
I never got to play that one, so you guys are going to have to tell me everything you can about
me
it.
neither. You gotta hold it on your shoulders.
Okay, so, and this kind of is a perfect place to dovetail this because actually all of Isuke's Strider-ish games are connected. They, Strider, Cannon Dancer, and Moondiver are all in the same continuity together per notes that he posted to his Facebook page that were translated by the guy that runs the Strider wiki over on the Strider Citadel
That's
a
Sombra,
couple of
right?
years back. Yeah, exactly, Sombra. He does amazing job over at the Strider wiki, and he just continually finds this stuff. But long story short, if I'm recalling correctly, and Sombra would be the one to really ask about this, Kirin, the main character of Cannon Dancer, is either from the same clan or was trained by the same people that trained the Kunyang MA team, Tonpu, Saipu, and Beipu. So that's why they have similar move sets. And Silence, the bonus character from Moondiver, is actually using a cipher. Um, the kanji is exactly the same. He's using a cipher. He's trained by Striders. As close as you can get to saying that he's trained by Striders without actually using the name Strider. So they're all three in the same universe, the Isuke verse, whatever you want to say, and they're all. It's like an alternate timeline of what Isuke would have done, or maybe he's just making it up as he goes along. But they're all using the same setting.
That's nice to be able to incorporate continuity like that.
Yeah. As far as gameplay though, Moondiver, I and my wife spent many an hour playing that game, and it is ridiculously hard. It is way harder than Strider 2014 ever aspired to be. There are moments that just are crushingly frustrating. In particular, there's a sequence with an auto-targeting device in one of the stages that you can't quite find in multiplayer because of the way that the screen kind of pans and zooms. You can't get a good handle on where it is, and then finally you find it. You're like, that thing, that needs to die now, as Scrollboss said, and it absolutely does. And the whole game is that way. Unless you're an avid explorer looking for all the little power-up drops and alternate routes, you're going to have a tough time. Particularly if you're trying to do this in bulldoze mode, the way that classic Strider and Cannon Dancer operate. You need some of those power-ups. There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
You need to explore. So that being said, it's a really tight game. It's a really tight take on Strider. And the fact that it's multiplayer, I don't think anything has even come close to it since the days of Shadow of the Ninja on the NES.
You know, though, that's actually the one thing that got me about Moondiver was that it was just so geared towards multiplayer. And it's like, I really couldn't get into it as just a single player.
Yeah.
So, good game, don't get me wrong. But it just, it's not easy trying to play it single player.
Yeah. It's not easy at all. So.
But, yeah, that's the two big Strider, related games he did. I know he's done a bunch of other ones, but they don't really qualify for this, I don't think. What I wanted to do briefly was touch upon a few of the different clones that were out there. One of the biggest being Run Saber for the Super NES.
Run Saber.
Yes. The game that has the audacity to, shout its own name during the music. It is, it's an interesting one.
Yes.
It reminds me of Contra for some reason.
It's the bioorganic enemies, although I'm pretty sure they were actually lifting that from Akira because, especially in the first days, there are bits that seem to be shout-outs to the Akira manga and bits of the movie, but notably the biotechnical organic sort of stuff and, how it's fused in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're right. I never connected that before, but you're absolutely right.
I like the eagle head martial arts cyborg in stage 3.
Yes, you
This
decapitate
game is-
this.
Go ahead.
Yes, you decapitate this giant eagle, and then it's giving a cyborg body, and then you have to get into a fist fight with it, basically, or sword, mono a sword, or however you would say.
This game is deliciously silly. I like it.
Yes, it captures that Strider energy so effectively, and just it almost like it dials it up to 11 at points. It's really interesting.
And the fact that it never made it out in Japan either was kind of a surprise.
Oh, like the NES Strider.
Yep. And then
They
there's
had us pegged.
Yeah. And then there was that little bit of a change they made, which, if you remember the second boss, in the
Yes.
retail version, it's that like weird skeleton zombie woman or whatever it is.
Yeah, it was originally like an actual giant woman.
Yeah, a prototype actually surfaced a little while back that had that original boss in it.
Interesting.
So it's nice you can actually play that now if you are so inclined. Still, I like the idea that you can actually choose between two different characters to play, and that there's a third one too. That even though you can't play as them, it's like kind of sets up this whole team they had going on.
Yeah, Alan and Sheena are the playable characters, and the Rogue One is Kurtz. He's basically your solo throughout the game.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, that last boss is weird. Well, most of the bosses are weird in that game.
Yeah. Last boss looks cool. Little bit of an anticlimax, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little bit.
But as Scroll Boss just said in the chat, fighting a jet while hanging on it. They could have been ripped right out of Strider.
Very awesome first boss, and maybe no other set piece in the game quite lives up to that.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. But yeah, there were a few others too. There was Assassin.
Oh boy.
Don't know much about that one. It's on the Amiga.
Yes, it's Strider with the boomerang and very Euro, and then they re-released they called it the Special Edition, which it cut out a stage and then it adds a gun, and that's really the big difference. I think it was a budget re-release, so that would probably explain it. Otherwise, I don't know a whole lot about it.
I know virtually nothing about it. But
Interestingly, the developer claims that he was not inspired by Strider at all. It was a completely original game.
sure he wasn't.
Lovely.
He emailed a bunch of people, people on staff, myself included and Rob included, at the Light Sword Cypher Mainframe a few years back, telling us exactly how much it wasn't inspired. And that was a whole ordeal in and of itself. It was very funny for those of us getting that email, because it was something that I wrote early on, an article, and I wasn't even being insulting or anything. It was just, this is a clone of Strider. This is something that you might want to play if you enjoy Strider. It's on the Amiga. And he got extremely offended by the comparison.
Yeah.
For no good reason.
And you know what gets me is that someone made a comment about that where it's like, after they saw that email, say, it looks like Grandpa's been Googling his old games again.
Yep, that was Suzaku.
That's
Jesse.
But yeah, just from what I've seen of the game, though, yeah, total Strider clone. Don't know if it's good or
I
bad.
am going to have to get going here shortly, guys. So is there anything else that you would like me to chime in on before I take off?
Well, now that you mention it, what do you know about any of the what little merchandise that actually come out? I know there was some kind of an action figure at one point. There's a Funko Pop, but I don't recall much else.
There is a Funko Pop that was included for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. It came with Gamora. And there was a action figure that was included with Spider-Man to promote Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Heroes. There were posters of various kinds. There was a finger skateboard that was put out to promote Strider 2.
That makes no sense.
Most of this stuff was all just like promotional items and not really retail. Like they were swag, basically given away in the Japanese stores. But probably the holy grail of anybody's merchandise collection would be the box set edition, the Ultimate Edition of Strider 2014 that had a behind-the-scenes manual, all of the soundtracks, hard copies of several of the games. It was everything that a Strider fan would want. Um, it was like $150 at the time. Um, and I never managed to get my hands on it, and neither did Tony Barnes, for that matter, as far as I know.
Wow. I suppose we should probably wrap things up here shortly. I know there were a couple other games that were pretty heavily inspired by Strider in a lot of ways. A couple of which the videos have been playing up here. One was Hagane for the Super NES. Another was one that's on right now, the Cliffhanger, Edward Randy.
Yes. And that one is interesting because it would then go on to inspire Gunstar Heroes. If you haven't played Edward Randy, definitely give that a spin, and you'll see why it inspired Gunstar Heroes. So you can trace a direct lineage from Strider all the way to Gunstar Heroes and Treasure in general, which is fascinating.
And also, Brandon asked if he said, wasn't there a letter opener based on the Cypher? I don't recall ever seeing one myself, but
That would be
I've
pretty
never
cool,
seen
actually.
one. I do not know. I'll have to look into that one. But I got to take off. It's been great hanging out with you guys, and I hope you all enjoyed the stream.
yeah, thanks for being
Yeah,
here,
thanks
Sam.
for stopping by.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was great. I had fun.
Have a good night, guys.
You too.
all right, take it easy.
Take care now.
All right. Another thing I want to say about Edward Randy is obviously it's very heavily influenced by Indiana Jones, which, of course, that automatically scores points for me.
Yes.
Oh yes.
It's basically a better version of Ernest Evans as well, but
Yeah.
we won't get into that one too much.
And one of several really great '90s Data East arcade games we're playing, like Boogie Wings and Night Slasher and all that.
Oh yeah, those are great.
They were on a roll, and then ironically Capcom sued them into oblivion.
Yeah. Such is how it goes, I guess.
Yeah.
Hagane was one that it didn't really strike me as exactly how Strider like it was until I got to play it years after it came out. And it's like it's got the sword play. There's a lot of those action type of set pieces, but it does combine a lot of stuff from Shinobi and like a ninja spirit and whatnot too in there. So it's kind of a nice hybrid of all that.
Yeah, Gane is really good. Pretty hard though, be warned.
I was gonna say, gorgeous game. I could never get past the first stage in that. Although maybe nowadays I could. I was a teenager at the time, and I was like trying to play it with a keyboard. I mean, you could probably imagine why, but
Yeah. That I mean, I've played it with actual hardware and stuff, and I still can't get past the first stage.
wow,
Yeah.
it is hard. That is its legacy. It's great but hard.
Mm-hmm. And there was another game that had come out. It was a downloadable title. I remember having the demo for the Xbox 360 for a while. It was a game called Blade Kitten. And it was
Yes, I actually own that one. And the developers were dedicated enough to actually return to it after their contract ended with their publisher. There was some bad blood there or something. They had a DLC or an extra episode ready to go to complete the game, and then it just sat there for I think 5 years. And they actually finished it. Solid game overall. A kind of a huge love letter to Strider and other anime sort of stuff. It's a very Western Euro anime, whatever you want to call it. I believe the company that made it is Australian, but worth looking into. It's not the best game, but it's got some charm to it.
It struck me as being like Strider with the sword familiar from Symphony of the Night and a cat girl.
Yes, that's the game. If you like cat girls, it's probably one of the better options on the market.
Yeah. I know there was Tanzer, a homebrew for the Genesis.
Yes, that's an interesting little one.
Yeah.
That's a cool one. It's really freaking hard.
It's Strider if it was a shmup.
Yeah. But
Shmupster.
It also has this really weird ambience, which I can only best describe as mutant Aeon Flux.
someone else I saw actually once described it as Strider meets Shadow of the Beast.
That's a good way of putting it. That's probably what any
Yes.
of those Amiga clones of Strider should have been, but we finally essentially got it, so no complaints there.
Yeah. And as far as anything else out there, way back when we were talking about the Genesis version of the original game, Sam had mentioned how the graphics were pretty much totally redrawn. Well, there's a fan project going right now that's actually trying to go ahead and bring the graphics to be more arcade-like than they were originally. It's called the Falcon Edition, which I presumably releases a ROM hack.
Yes, you showed that. You actually showed this to us a day or two ago, and it's really impressive. They even brought back Strobia's steroid machine, which is another call out to Ivan Drago.
Yep. And I like how a lot of the little background details, which were cut for whatever reason, are back. Like some of the weird little antennas and stuff in the first stage. It's like stuff that could have been there the first time, but forever. There's one thing in particular that strikes me. There's a pole you can climb on when you're halfway up a mosque, and in the original Genesis version, it's just a plain gold pole. But in the arcade game, it had these weird little antennas coming off it. Those have been restored. The tiny little details like that, it's nice to see.
Yes, the drill machine also they touched that up as well, which I'm going to assume it was limitations of the hardware and probably either budgetary or time constraints is why we didn't get a one-to-one port. I believe the Ghouls and Ghosts port, which is also a fantastic port, had some similar sort of differences as well. Maybe that'll get a ROM hack as well.
That'd be
Just can't
nice.
say.
I know there's someone else out there who's working on a Sunset Riders, basically just a completely extensive ROM hack.
You would have to be, yes.
Yeah,
I like the weird level structure of that version, but it's very disappointing. You can only play as two of the characters, and I don't even think there's two-player in that game. Is there? I think it's just single player.
I want to say there is two player, but I'm not 100% on that.
Okay, okay.
That and how the game is just so dark.
Yeah, the Back to the Future 3 game on the Genesis has the same problem. I don't know why.
It's like they say, Old West must be dark. But getting back to Strider, Hiryu and some of the cast have also popped up in various other games over the years as cameos or full blown playable characters or whatnot. Like was it Namco Cross Capcom was one of them?
Yes.
That's is that just a regular JRPG or is that like a tactical RPG or something along those lines?
I only know it because it's a huge fan service vehicle, but I've never actually seen proper gameplay of it. I've mostly just seen story bits, especially stuff involving Phoenix Wright and that sort of thing. I haven't actually seen how Strider relates to that, interestingly.
If I remember correctly, he and Mayo are both in the game, and so is the Third Moon. And Mayo's doing something that relates to the overall plot, I think.
He would do that, yes. He is a schemer like that.
Yep. Plus, I know the character showed up in some of the various card games they've had for handhelds. Like there was another one had characters from Ghosts and Goblins in it, and I just wish I could remember what they were called off the top of my head. But I'm pretty sure if it's
They're not
Strider,
Hanafuda cards, are they? Or
no, this is like a video card game.
oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Whichever.
Heppen, was it?
What's that?
Heppen? Is that what it's called? Or am I thinking of something else?
I think I don't know. I think it's a little older than that actually.
SNK versus Capcom Card Fighters Clash?
That sounds familiar. That could be
Hmm.
the one. I can tell you that any of these are going to be found on the Strider wiki there, Striderpedia. Does why did I just blank on his name? Sombra. He's done such an extensive job on that wiki. It's incredible. So plus there's been a new number of fan projects over the years and there's other stuff we didn't even get to touch on earlier when Sam was here, like the supposed suicide rumors.
What?
Did you never heard about that?
No.
All right. Supposedly, and it's the best of my memory. They say a programmer had actually killed themselves while working on the game. A lot of people thought it was Isuke. And there's a scene in, I think it's Street Fighter Alpha 2, where you see Hiryu in the background of a stage tossing a teddy bear up and down. And supposedly that was a tribute to this programmer. Turns out it wasn't.
I remember the teddy bear.
Yeah, that was actually, I think Isuke put it, he said it was just the Street Fighter Alpha team messing around. But it does kind of relate in a way to this little hidden detail in the original arcade game.
Yes, the little panda bear.
Yep. And it was something that was put in without his knowledge, if I remember correctly. So, but it's there, so it kind of tangentially relates because they're both bears. But yeah, there's been a lot of rumors about Isuke over the years, and he was pretty reclusive for the longest time. I remember when Sam had gotten in touch with him originally, and we were talking, and it's like, I don't think the man actually knew that he had fans outside of Japan. So he was quite gratified to learn that there were so many people that appreciated Strider and his other work, throughout the world. So, and that gets touched on in the interview too, like right at the very end, where he talks about his upcoming game, which ended up being Moondiver. So, if you read that interview, you'll see exactly what he has to say. But to give you an idea, it basically kind of boosted his confidence finding out all this.
Sorry, I'm not actually sure what to say in regards to that, but yeah, I can see why that would boost your confidence. I mean, if I found out I had international fans, that would be kind of neat. I don't know what they'd be fans of exactly, other than video game related stuff, but
well, he actually started off in films, I remember. And then when he started working for Capcom, he started pretty much working exclusively in games. Yeah, I've talked to him a couple times myself over Facebook. And nice guy from what I've talked to him.
Yeah, he seems really humble overall.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Let's see, I know I remember reading a really good interview with him. I think it was in a book. Can't remember which one off the top of my head, and I know it came after the interview that Sam and I did. So, anyway, just to kind of wrap things up here, Strider's been around for over 30 years now, and clearly it's left an impact on people. And what would you say about its legacy? I mean, if people are still, for some reason, thinking about Strider 20, 30 years from now, what do you think is going to stand out the most?
Honestly, the kinetic gameplay. Something that has always stood out to me about that game, thinking about it, is like I said earlier, it's kind of like it kind of ushered in the 16-bit era, before we even realized what was going to come of that. I honestly wonder, like, if we would have gotten games, quite like Sonic the Hedgehog, which had similar sort of slope terrain, or even stuff like Earthworm Jim, Cool Spot, those American games without it, because it just did things that other games at the time were doing, that games later weren't doing, that even games today aren't doing. You got that really fast kinetic gameplay that doesn't hold back at all. It doesn't, it doesn't drag on or anything like that. The level design is just so organic. Like I see so many, retro pixel indie games, and they look great and they play great in a lot of cases, but they just don't have that dynamism to it. And that still has stuck with me ever since. The set pieces, the big bosses, just how everything sort of ties together into this package. You don't even really question why you're fighting a giant mechanical gorilla. It's just there in your way. You have to defeat it. That's just the nature of being Strider Hiryu. That's just his work day. That's, you go to work, you kill a giant mecha gorilla, and, you destroy an entire parliament that turns into a centipede for some reason. That's just part of the job.
Yeah, exactly. How about you, Mike?
Not sure what I could add to that. I just think that the overall, globe-trotting design of Strider is just sort of something you don't see often enough in games. It's like 5 very distinct levels, but it all sort of forms a very cohesive adventure, and one that is very fast paced and can be beaten in under half an hour. Granted, maybe for its time, that doesn't seem like anything too original, but I want to say maybe with games, as much as I do like a lot of modern games, like you sort of miss something like that can just be beaten snap, crackly, pop like that, and just leaves you feeling satisfied, even if it was in the blink of an eye.
Yep.
It's I guess it's like a nice meal or something, whatever you consider that to be. Um, it may be over in a flash, but you think about it a lot. It just brings back these good memories. Um, and I really appreciate, you touched on that real quick, Mike, that the game it doesn't waste your time. It's very quick. It might only last maybe 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, but you're loving every minute of it. And I think a lot of modern games could stand to learn a lot from that, especially ones that want to be as cinematic as Strider is. Like, that is to me what a cinematic game is. It's not something with, you know, quote unquote movie like cutscenes. It's the way the gameplay is presented. Honestly, the closest analog I could think of in gaming would probably be Half-Life. Half-Life does a lot of similar sort of set pieces there, and it also remains entirely in game. It never really stops, with one exception, but it's just that seamless nature of it. I think a lot of modern games could still stand to learn a lot from. It doesn't even have like it has interstage cutscenes, and that's about it in terms of dialogue, and it's just there to set up the atmosphere. That's one thing the sequel, or rather the reboot, the 2014 game did really well, is just nailing that atmosphere with the cutscenes.
Yep. And, I can't argue with any of that. I agree with all of it. But you guys both forgot one very important thing.
Uh-oh. What's that?
Solo.
Oh, yes. I mean, he was probably my favorite part of the 2014 reboot. He was just so cool. Everything about him,
Yeah.
and his boss fight was great. It's just that's one of the highlights of that game for me. I still think about that from time to time.
I
Yeah.
forgot another thing, the whale.
Oh, yeah. The whale, definitely. Uh, so, all right. Before we sign off, let's go back over the chat for a minute. A few people have popped in and commented. So
Yeah, we've gotten some great comments here. I'm sad I wasn't able to touch on a lot of them, but
yeah. So see if there's anything. Scroll Boss, for example, it said everyone else approaches Strider as a game, but Isuke was thinking of playable movies in the good way, not FMV stuff.
Good distinction.
Yep. And let's see.
hey, later, Scroll Boss.
Yeah. No problem. I'll talk to you again soon, Scrollbots. And Zombie also said here that Strider gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I've seen some of that. Not a lot, but some of it.
Really? How so?
I think the most recent thing I saw was actually this morning when I saw one of the announcements regarding the Cannon Dancer release that's coming up. And someone was like, Strider's just overrated. And it's like,
What a
Oh no,
loser.
it's the Sonic / Donkey Kong Country was never good conundrum.
yeah.
You're allowed to have your opinion unless it's wrong, you goddamn chunk.
Let's see. Other than that, let's see. Now, Brandon mentioned something about how. Let me see what he said here. Something about hack and slash not being the same as a Metroid Castlevania. Well, yeah, that's true. Except that the 2014 Strider, even though it's got those hack and slash elements, is totally a Metroidvania. There's just no two ways around it.
Mm-hmm.
And no problem, Zombie. So I think with that we're going to sign off. Just did want to say one thing though. Next week we're doing another roundtable, and Sam will be back for that one. It's going to be a webmasters roundtable. So there's going to be a couple of very interesting surprise guests that'll be joining Sam and I for that. So I hope you all have a chance to tune in and check that out, or heck, watch it when it's over, because we've got some stories about our years of running fan sites, which I think you're going to be amused by, if nothing else. So, all right, guys. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that does it. Thanks for having me on this, Rob. It's been a lot of fun talking about one of those classic games that I grew up with and love so much. Yeah, I don't know what else to add. There's nothing really better than talking about a game you love. So
That's true.
Yeah, despite being in the best of health currently, it's been a very fun time, and thank you for having me.
Well, glad you can make it again, Mike.
Thanks, dude.
And yes, unlimited retro gaming. Yes, feel free to go ahead and watch a video later. And yes, Strider is awesome. Night BL85, and we will see you all later. All right.
take it easy, folks.
Yep.
Take
Y'all have a
care.
good night.